here's the problem with technology. We'll just start there, shall we? Which is, this is going to be videotaped. I've got wires running all over me here. So this one's going to be for the videotape, and this one's for the podcast, and then we'll record that over there. And so, the problem is that with these presentations, I put them online, right? So I've got two audiences. One, you guys, which you're my favorites. And then, the people who are going to watch the videotapes, who watched the previous one, who are going to be bored silly with, oh no, not that crap again. So this ran into my head as I was thinking about how can I make this, new and exciting for all involved, and I can't. So I'm going to at least make it interesting for me. But it's very interesting because that got me sort of stuck on a theme, which is as this year I'm an OITP fellow, which sounds very exciting, but ALA has something called the Office for Information Technology Policy. I'm sure you've spent many, many hours on their website. And many people, frankly, don't know it exists, but you do. And ALA has a Washington office. The Washington office's job is to think about policy. It's got two halves of the office. One half is government legislative affairs, which is more or less a lobbying firm to make sure that ALA's views are presented on the Hill. And the other is a think tank called OITP, and its job is to think about how technology is going to shape policy and sort of think ahead. And the way I got suckered into this, the way I became part of it was a couple of years ago. There was some policy movement afoot related to social networks. This was the time when Time magazine was talking about predators online, children predators, and MySpace will be the ruination of society, and Facebook is just there so that we can do horrible things. And there was introduced a piece of legislation called DOPA, the Defense Against Online Predators Act, or Deleting Online Predators Act. And what it tried to do is say, good news, now that we've gotten schools and public libraries that accept federal funds to filter, we're going to go ahead and tell you what to filter. And so they wanted to say, we want you to filter these kinds of sites so that our poor, impressionable children don't get access to this horrible, evil stuff. And so they, of course, began to define what it is that they wanted to filter. And they started with things like, well, we can't say MySpace because that's just tacky. And we'll call them social networks, but no one knows what that is. So they ended up with something that said, all right, we're going to filter things called interactive websites. And don't worry what that is, because we'll form a committee afterwards that will actually define the site. So the Committee for Un-American Acts was, luckily the legislation did not pass. But we've had son of DOPA, and we've had state regulation. Now, aside from the politics of all of this, what it really raised was this rather delicate issues that libraries were going to face, like Congress, which was in boardrooms and in faculties and in all over the place. Libraries were going to have to sort of face this issue. Web 2.0, Library 2.0, MySpace, Flickr, pick the name du jour. What are the libraries' roles in it? What's the responsibilities? What should we be doing? Should we host these? Should we provide access to these? And so OITP commissioned myself and my colleagues Joanne Silverstein and Scott Nicholson to think about this and sort of say, what is this world? And as we looked at it, we started where all bad projects do, which is, well, it was a good project, but a bad starting place, which was we started the really bad dictionary. A mashup is this. A social network site is this. A friendship site is this. And it still sort of exists in this technology brief, but we really found that terribly unsatisfying. And so we wanted to think, what's going on here? Why are Flickr and MySpace and all these things, new and cool and interesting? Why are people using them? And why do we sort of think about them in the same breath? What is that? And so we tried to look back and see if there was something more fundamental and durable going on here. And where we ended up, we think is got a pretty big impact for libraries in general, which was we said, what's going on here is learning. That what's happening is that when people engage in learning process, when they want to really figure out what's going on, they engage in conversation. Sometimes if you're in the school library world, you've heard of things like critical thinking, and you've heard of things like self-reflective thinking and metacognition, where we talk to ourselves. Sometimes we go and talk to our professor, or we talk to a colleague, or we talk to our friends. Institutions talk to each other, and countries talk to each other. And so when you're in the midst of this, you're trying to learn, and you're trying to have a conversation. It comes from something called conversation theory. And we're going to get back into that in a little bit. So we came out with this technology draft, and we said, all right, we sort of think something interesting is going on here, and we think it has bigger consequences just for more than adding tagging to our cataloging. We think this might have pretty big implications for how libraries are structured. And so we've been in the midst of doing follow-up activities where we go and we say, all right, given these concepts, what's the implication for reference? What's the implication for catalogs? What's the implications for LIS education? And we've been talking with students and professors about, talk to us about technology and some of these concepts and see if they're working. So that's what I've been doing. It's a really short way. And what I'd like to do tonight is I'm sort of in this sort of interesting formative moment. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going to sort of think out loud for a while and ask you to rein me in a bit. And I'm going to start with, what started me all this about multiple people seeing this was got this idea of repetition in my head. That the idea of, God, not the same thing over and over again. And so I'm going to start. If you want to hear more of the details on the project and you want to see some of the whiz-bang demos of what reference could look like in a participatory world, and if you want to hear some of the more directed stuff, I'm going to direct you to the project website, ptbed.org, and go nuts. You're going to see presentations and movies on this and details and such. So, if you want to see the concrete stuff, that's a good place to start. But I'm going to start tonight, if you don't mind, in Italy. There you go. Always a good place to start. The Florentine dilemma. The good news about if you write a cool technology brief, people invite you to come to Florence to talk about it. So I was in Florence to talk about it. And I do what every good academic does when they go to Florence, which is to make their presentation and then book 3 extra days to walk around Florence. And as part of that, I visited the Academy. The Academy something terribly Italian, but it's the main art academy that's existed since the Renaissance, about Renaissance art. That's where the David sculpture is, and so you can go visit this. And as part of that process, or as part of that tour, there was this sort of group mulling around the end of a hallway, and I sort of jumped on the back of it, and they opened this gate with a key, and they all funneled through there, and I sort of funneled through with them. And luckily they were speaking English, so I was willing to go with it. And what it was the sculpture room, which is really cool. I did not know this, but when you're doing the big marble sculptures, has anyone done a big marble sculpture in your life? I certainly have not. You do it in plaster first, and you usually do it in scale. And then what you do is in the plaster, you nail all of these little pins so that you can go and do measurements. And so you can have calipers there, and so you can take it back and forth and such. And so this was like all of these amazing plaster sculptures since, the Renaissance that they had. And I mean, it was literally from that, the length of this room, from wall to wall. And along one side, and probably 20 feet, they had busts. So they had these sculptures of heads and famous people, and just rack upon rack of them. And so I'm really excited. This is cool. And the tour guide starts talking, and this tour guide points to this beautiful painting and said, and that's the problem. I said, maybe I didn't hear that right. And she goes, and you'll see down here on the bottom level are all the masters' sculptures. These are all the teachers' sculptures. And then every row above it are the students. Their final projects are to basically replicate the masters. And she said, and that's the problem. Look here, I'm going, this amazing sculpture. I'm like, problem, I'm missing this. What is the problem here? She said, the problem is that you can't tell those from those, that the best that a student could achieve in the Florentine discipline at this academy was to be as good as the master and to replicate the master. And she would point to these wonderful paintings, and she goes, and these are the problems. He said, once again, the problems are that they're photographic in nature. And the idea was that the painter had to get it as close to nature as possible. There's a few symbolism in here, but mostly it's like a Polaroid of this with real people. And the Florentine art community felt in the Renaissance that they had basically perfected art. It wasn't that they were really good at it, and it wasn't that they were a point in time at it. They'd done it. This was it. And so for hundreds of years in Florence, the best you could do as an artist is to replicate the state of the art. And so what would happen at the end of the academy is that they would send out clones of themselves. And so what you ended up with was an educational system that replicated itself over and over and over again, stifling innovation and leading to a real conformity to a norm. And I thought, this is interesting. And it's a metaphor that's emerged to me as I've been going down to LIS education and thinking, are we sort of in this point where what we're doing is when you graduate with your MLS, you're as good as me, right? Or you're the same as me. Or we're teaching some sort of doctrine to you that you're walking out. And is that what we need to do? And is that where we should be? So that got me thinking about some problems currently that we have going in the library science field, and I would argue, I'm going to keep it technology centered, but really wink, wink, nod, nod, much larger than technology. This is a wonderful quote by Zangwill, that the past, our cradle, not our prison. There is danger as well as appeal in its glamour. The past is for inspiration, not imitation, for continuation, not repetition. And I think that sometimes in a field, particularly of library science, that has such a rich history, I mean, you know, we all point to Dewey and then we sort of point back to, oh, and by the way, that whole Library of Alexandria thing a couple centuries ago, that was us. You know, and cuneiforms, that was us. I mean, the example, you know, that we may not be the oldest profession, but we're probably the ones that were cataloging their clientele. This is an issue, right? And so what I want us to think about today is I want to sort of all give ourselves permission to be sort of university-esque and think really broadly and be willing to look at some of this and admire our history, but don't get mired in our history. And I think that one of the problems we often have, particularly in library science, and I'm willing to admit myself as part of this, is that we become so fixated on practice and we become so fixated on the current that we ignore the fact that it's partially our job to move things ahead. And so what I want to talk about today is that challenge and how we can move it ahead. So I'd say problem number one that we have, particularly in terms of library technology and library systems, is that we're getting really close to repetition. I dare you to find a librarian who walks up and says that their online catalog is completely satisfactory. I dare you. I dare you to find someone who says, oh, that SILS Dynex system is perfect. You know, that someone who walks in and says, I can't believe that Unicorn could be such, I mean, as if from the head of Zeus was born my catalog, right? It doesn't happen. And yet, what's amazing is we keep installing those systems. I was talking with a good friend of mine at a major library vendor / consortium, which will go nameless, called OCLC, that was talking about Question Point. Question Point's the digital reference package. And he said, you know, what drives me nuts is that I have clients who come to me and they tell me exactly what they want. And we go, yeah, that's great. And we want to innovate. Yeah, that's great. And then they hand me this contract that they got from the last person who purchased Question Point that has all this stuff in it that they said they didn't want, but I'm now going to be contractually obligated to deliver. Our licensing forms have become so sophisticated, so complicated, and so gobbledygooky that we're actually signing into things that we don't want anymore, but there's inertia into, well, that's the licensing form we've always had. And so there are many times when you look at library systems where, frankly, you see a lot of repetition and not a lot of inspiration. And so what is it that we can preserve and save from this stable technology and move ahead? So, problem number one. Problem number two is the opposite extreme. Here's a quick little joke for you. We all know that person. And the reason I bring that joke in is this quote that, if I can make this work. There we go. Change is like heaven. Everyone thinks it's a good idea, but nobody wants to go first, right? That sometimes the opposite extreme of repetition and doing the same thing over and over again because it's what I was taught in school and it's what we used to have and it's what's available to me and it smells like a library and it feels like a library, it must be a library, is the fact that, oh my God, there's a new technology, let's do it now. Right? That currently there's a lot of hysteria for if it's new, we must implement it. And what's interesting is when we sat down to look at technologies like Web 2.0 and Library 2.0 and all these kinds of things, it would have been very easy for us to label our paper the Library 2.0 paper. It would have been really easy and trendy to say what we do is Library 2.0, but we chose this thing called participatory librarianship. Why? Well, one, we didn't like social networks because social network sounds like you're looking for a party on Friday night. I'm sorry, no matter how much we try. But the other thing that we found with Library 2.0 is there's some really brilliant work being done. And I don't want to castigate Library 2.0. But there's also a lot of anger in Library 2.0 language. If you read the Library 2.0 language, it's almost a militantism that says if it's new, it's good. If it's old, it's crap. That we need to blog, and we need to wiki, and we need to tag, and we need to do all this stuff. And why? Because we're so far behind, and the systems don't work, and we need a new paradigm, and stored in the Bastille. Now, once again, I don't want to say that's universal, but there's a lot of venom if you read between the lines. There's also they have the same problem as Web 2.0, which is defining the central concept is tough. Right? Why is a blog and a wiki my standing joke is with Library 2.0, with a couple of centuries of effort, couldn't we at least be on version 12.5 beta? It's like nothing existed before yesterday. Hello, what? So it's the opposite extreme that we have a problem with. And this is what drives people like Michael Gorman crazy. Michael Gorman drives me crazy, but what drives him crazy when he looks at things and he talks about, well, we were supposed to have libraries at briefcases because microfiche was going to do that. And then we have so many, I think at one point he talked about libraries as this sort of graveyard of technologies gone by, that if it's new, we buy it. Now, ironically, microfiche, probably here forever. It's non-biodegradable. So where is that Gorman? Oh, better, Nicholson. Mr. Baker. Yeah. Well, but I can't blame them because if given the anarchy of the situation and you have to find certainty, you pick something. So, say what you want about Nicholson Baker, at least he believes something, right? Strongly. That's right. And so what I guess we're in this interesting situation, which is how do we deal with these two extremes? How do we keep from repeating ourselves and getting bored? How do we keep from having libraries that look like 1965 for the rest of our lives? One of the things I'm really worried about, the reason I'm in town is I'm spending the week at the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice is talking about, with their law library, how can we innovate and be really cool? And what's interesting is the minute you throw out a cool technology, they all look at you like this. Right? Oh, you can have RSS feeds. We're not allowed to have IM. We have to have 12 different email addresses because we have 12 different networks. And it's like this litany of all the problems that federal governments can put in front of innovation, they've managed to find it. Right? I mean, there are actually some people who theorize that you need an inefficient government so it doesn't take control of your life. But I don't think that these are philosophers causing these problems. And so they're in a situation where it's like they want to try new stuff, but they can't. And one of my worries is that we're going to end up with a federal government that's going to stuck in 2004 internet land for the rest of the history of the country, because we can't take personalization services because that might violate privacy, and we can't do it for security, and we can't let them behind the firewall. And so all of the cool new stuff that's good, that's durable, we're not going to be able to implement because we've put so many burdens to save ourselves from ourselves that we can't take advantage of these new technologies. Well, I'm worried that libraries will get caught in the same trap. So, what do we do in this situation? How do we get ourselves out between, a rock and a hard place? And I think the solution is, for dealing with this, is we need to go back to our core principles. I must have been hungry when I was doing this. That we need to innovate from core principles. So when we talk about technology in the curriculum, when we talk about technology in libraries, when we talk about what's new, what's cool, what we implement, we need to really deal with what is the core business that we are in and how does it match. And I want to be really clear here. This is not my way of saying we need to stop playing with technology. I think there's a really important role for play. Call it tinkering, call it playing, call it experimentation. I think that libraries and library students and library professors should do a hell of a lot of just playing and not worrying about how it's going to be implemented. But at the end of the day, that play has to turn into go, no go. And it's that go, no go that libraries have a real problem making the decision on with technology right now. And frankly, library professors who worry about what to implement in their classrooms have a real hard time making that, does this suddenly become core? I remember it was not that long ago, like 4 years, that we debated our online searching class, what it was. Is it dialogue? No one does dialogue anymore, but is it those? Or is it Google? Is online searching really teaching, basic stuff of Boolean logic, but then what's the systems we show it in? And you know where we ended up? Mostly on Google. We ended up talking about the fact is that when our librarians go into libraries, on-the-job training is going to teach them a lot of different databases, a lot of different interfaces, and we can't in our classes teach those, right? We are to the point now where there are going to be more interfaces to online databases than librarians soon. So if we all pick one, we'll still be outnumbered. So the idea of in 13 weeks we can teach you every interface to every search engine, that's gone. Forget it, right? When dialogue was out there, we had one and we were happy, right? And so we said, look, we're going to teach them the basics of what searching is, but we can't teach interface and interface. The universal is online resources. The universal that we're going to be able to teach and teach these. Have you looked at Google's advanced search? First of all, you notice they don't actually have one. Remember all the good old days when you click advanced search and there were like 20 fields that suddenly popped up? Google doesn't have one. You know what Google has? A dialogue search interface. The pluses and minuses and the abouts and whatever, it's 1970s all over again. It's just they figured out that you can do both at the same time. So we need to return to theory. We need to look at our core functions. And so, return to theory. Many people are now frightened to hear me use the word theory, right? So of theory and practice. So multiple quotes. Quote number 1, practice without theory is to sail an uncharted sea. Theory without practice is not to sail at all. This has been used in many different places. Practice without theory is sterile. I hate that phrase, but I like this as more poetic, right? Or as someone online once put it, and once again showing you that I was in fact hungry when putting these slides together. To me, theory is like vegetables. I don't like eating it, but I realize I have to in order to stay healthy. Now, I don't know about, I'm looking at my faculty colleagues in the audience. Maybe you don't have this, but I've sensed an unease with theory and our field. And that is to say that theory's rough. And library science has really gotten beat up about theory because we use the word science. And a lot of people go, library science? I know what chemistry is. I know what physics are. But what is library science? Where's your theory? What's that unifying concept in theory that makes this a science? What's predictive in here? And so many scholars, when we're in snooty institutions, look at library and say, you guys are an applied school. You're a trade school. All right, I'm being brutal here, but it's the idea of saying that if you're in economics, you buy into a school of economics. If you want to become a physicist, you better know string theory. If you're going to be this, there's a body of theory that holds us together as a field. Library science, you guys just have practice and a place that holds you together. The way we define librarians is the people that we hire in those places. That's not theory. I think that's unfair to a degree. And many people would say that the real division between the L word and the I word, library schools and information schools, or library science and information science, that's actually one of the divisions. They would say, well, information science is the theory that drives library science. It comes from information science. Many people would also go, ooh, I don't know about that. This, I think, is part of the problem. And I'll pick on McGrath for a moment. This was, McGrath wrote in a piece on, it was actually a special issue on theory, that he wanted to develop a grand unified explanatory theory of librarianship, which is not a modest goal. And then, I'm sure he's a nice guy. The author makes an analogy to the unification of the fundamental forces of nature, beginning with Copernican revolution, followed by Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and Einstein. The unification of electromagnetism, light, the weak force, the electromagnetic force, the strong force, and the ultimate goal to include gravity, space, time, and relativity in a single grand unified theory. He said this is a great goal, we should do it for libraries. Hello. And this is where he ended up. Now, I should, if you want to publish in JASIS, this is the JASIS version. Okay. 2 people got that. The 2 people who tried to publish in JASIS. What he said was, if we look, his approach, for right or for wrong, was to look at all the stuff we know currently about library function. So what's important to count in this library function? What's important to count in this library function? If we take all these measures and metrics and we put them together in a magical formula, we should end up with a quantitative, predictive, evaluative mechanism for theory, the grand Copernican revolution in libraries. And I put plus signs here. That's an oversimplification. He didn't say, here's how these different measures actually interact. But it's a lot of, if we take these different metrics and put them together, we get predictive theory. Now, anyone want to take a moment to read that and tell me if they have any issues with that one? Yes, sir.
I think there's a huge gap in it. I don't see service.
Yep. I don't see reference. I don't see service. Anyone else want? Any youth services people out there? Any archivist, you could argue, is in preservation, sort of. That's one of his big problems. But I want to give him credit that he tried. And I want to say one of the issues that he faced was no one really has a unified vision of what libraries are to work with. Are archives part of libraries? Archivists will tell you sometimes, right? Is reference really in there? Is reference something that could be measured? And how would it be measured? And is it really just an alternative interface to the collection? What is the service of the collection and the interaction between these things? The problem is that this is not theory. All right, so excuse me as I just take a moment. Some people talk about big theory and little theory, big T and the little t. Big theory are things like evolution, electromagnetic forces, relativity. Big theory explain lots of stuff. I like big theory. My personal big theory is in complexity theory and conversation theory. Then there's the little t, and if you read it all in the information retrieval literature, you are assailed with the little t. It's the theory of why people will scroll to the second screen or not. It's the theory of why looking at keywords and collocation is important. It's more like hypothesis, but it's really, really specific. And I think it's really interesting and worth, though, taking a moment to take what you sort of McGrath's challenge of, can we think of a big unifying theory or concept behind libraries and see if it's useful? And I want to be real clear that normally, if we were in many other settings, I'd start with, let's talk about the separation between theory and practice and how you feel about it. I think I'm so tired of having those conversations, so what I'm going to do is give you mine and then you can argue it. Because that's what academia is about. I mean, this is, if you think about, have you ever wondered why academics and your professors are a little odd? Because we've been, just a little, we've been trained in this sort of Socratic method, which is we learn through argument. And so if I posit something, there will be an academic here who will automatically take the opposite extreme. Whether they believe it or not, it's automatic. And we will argue to the truth, right? And the person taking the opposite, if they don't necessarily believe it, they're doing a service because they want to find and punch holes in it, and that's how you arrive at the truth, right? So I'm going to just lay this sucker out there, and then we can argue and fight for the truth. So why does this theory, why is McGrath's approach, I think, faulty? Well, the number one reason I think it's faulty is because libraries are not natural things. Libraries are not organic. Libraries are not a creation of the world. They're a creation of man. I'm a Catholic, so I can use high aspirational theories like that, right? But anyway, that in essence, the problem with McGrath is like having a theory of General Motors or a theory of Walmart or a theory of, right? What we're looking at is an artificial construct that people put together and saying, oh, let's look at this construct and see why it works the way. Well, it works that way because people put it together that way, right? And so it's an artificial structure. What we need to look for are big theory that talk about why people would put those things together to begin with. Why are they organized that way? Sociology, looking at sociology and talking about how do people build groups. Information seeking theory, why do people seek certain types of information versus other types of information? So here's my theory du jour for you, and that is this conversation theory. And I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. A fellow by the name of Gordon Pask, in the 1970s, actually earlier in the 1960s, was a cybernetician. We all know of cyberneticians well. They worked on cybernetics. So general systems theory said you have input, process, output. the cybernetics people came in and said it's a little bit more complicated than that. Got feedback going, got all these mechanisms, and the idea was it's very much geared in artificial intelligence. But how do we get machines to learn, machine learning theory, these kinds of things. And so Pask set out, because this was in the glory days when we were going to have 6 computers that ruled the world and they were all going to think for us. He set out to teach machines to think. And he said, the way I'm going to teach machines to think is I'm going to start with how people think. Radical concept. Or as we like to say, we're going to deal with natural intelligence until artificial intelligence catches up. So he looked at this and he said, all right, how do people think? And he came up with this concept called knowledge is created through conversation. He called it conversation theory. And it goes something like this. If you've dealt with education theory at all, you've probably heard some of this with scaffolding and spiral curricula and these things. But it's the idea that you and I are going to have a conversation. And the way we do this is we do it through a series of agreements. So can we agree that we're in the same room? Yes. Can we agree that that's the color orange? Well, I think it's salmon. No, I think it's rust. All right, well, let's call it rust. All right, that's now rust. It doesn't make it rust. We haven't discovered the truth. We've agreed that we're going to call that rust. Even if, by the way, in their mind going, yeah, but it's really orange, right? Even if we've done that, we've set an agreement. And what we then do is, all right, if that's orange, then this is brown. Okay, and so you begin scaffolding these agreements together. And not only do you begin coming up with these agreements, but you begin to come up with the relationships among these agreements. If that is, therefore that. This is a type of orange, therefore it belongs to this family. Whatever it is. And so through this process of conversation, which is just the idea of interactions back and forth, we come up with a series of agreements, and the sum total of that becomes our knowledge. And what all that means is it's their cognitive structures, what he would call entailment meshes, which is sort of how we view the world. And so whenever I encounter a novel situation or a new factor, I sort of run it against this mesh and say, all right, it fits, it doesn't fit, it's unique, it's not. And I add it to, modify, come up with new agreements. I told you, stick with me. It's like spinach. Just go with it for a moment. Right? So this idea, this theory is that if we learn through conversation, and now remember, he's a cybernetician, and he's worried about computers. And so he didn't come up with things like people. He talked about cognizing agents. Right? And the reason that that's important is that it's a scalable concept. He said, in your head right now, you've got lots of these cognizing agents. Right? In the morning when you say, well, let's see, if I go left, I'll go by the bagel place. If I go right, I'll get there faster. You're having a debate. You're having a conversation with yourself. And you sort of, for a moment, split yourself in two and talk until you agree with yourself, and then you move forward. Right? The idea that when I do this, there's two things that are going on. You heard it, and you saw it. And so your senses get together and go, I heard something, and you say, I saw something. So we agree that's the same thing? Sure, why not? That's the kind of conversations. And then he scaled it up and said, well, if I'm talking to you, you can be aggregated into one cognizing agent, I'm another, we can talk. Or if we're talking about me to you as a group, you're one, I'm another. And so it's a scalable concept. Right? I like this because of things like complexity theory and such. But let's take a look at the consequences of this. If this is true, if knowledge is in fact created through conversation, and if we argue that libraries are in the knowledge business, then libraries are in the conversation business. Right? Now, first, we have to agree that we're in the knowledge business. And there's the truth of that and there's the verbiage of that. Right? Back to my challenges. After you find the librarian who loves their catalog, I want you to go out and find a librarian who says, I'm not in the knowledge business. Right? You might be more successful in this one, but I'm in the information business. I'm in the book business. I'm in the stuff organizing business. I'm in the warehousing business. It just doesn't have the same ring as I'm in the knowledge business. Right? But it's important, because if you're in the stuff business, if you're in the thing business, if you're in the organizing business, you do one thing. In fact, you do a lot of what libraries do now. But if you're in the knowledge business, life begins to change a bit. All right? Because the first thing that happens is that artifacts, the things that are produced out of knowledge, become secondary. What do I mean by that? A book is not knowledge. A book is a result of a knowledge process. Right? A transcript is not knowledge. It's the result of a knowledge process. They're artifacts. They take on secondary importance. They don't become irrelevant. They don't become unimportant. They become secondary in importance. Right? I want to be real clear. This is, since you showed me the Nicholson Baker book, this is not burn the book time. This is not your next library should have no book time. I've been accused of that. I'm not there. What I'm saying is realize that the books are there for a purpose. They are not the purpose. Okay? So, given that artifacts are in the secondary business, the other thing we have to realize is that knowledge is about learning, not dissemination. It's not enough to say, here's a bunch of stuff. You've learned. It doesn't work that way, right? It's the empty bucket model. It's how we used to treat education. You are all empty buckets, and I'm showing bricks of knowledge into your empty buckets, and you'll walk out if you're being brilliant. It's the sage on the stage model. And frankly, it's the model for what I'm doing right now, which, ironically, is the least effective way that I could be doing this right now. But I'm doing it, right? And so simply compiling and putting a bunch of stuff together and handing it to someone, you could say is dissemination. But you can't say it's learning. All right? So let's look at what's the implication of these two ideas. Artifacts are secondary, and knowledge is about learning. Where does that take us? Well, it allows us to start talking about those core principles. So take a moment. It's so low resolution, but it's so funny. Who else is in the knowledge business? If we do not have our core knowledge and understand what our core principles are, we end up confounding who are competitors and who are cooperators. Who are the people out to be in our business that we should be worried about or should be working with, and who aren't? And so I want to take a couple of these and think them through. Is Google in the same business as libraries? And I would certainly tell you that many libraries have said yes. Many libraries say yes, if not explicitly, they say it out of fear. And what's nice is we're really in the sort of post-Google era. We're all still here, they're still here, we can get along. But I'll tell you, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if you went to a conference and it wasn't why Google is going to destroy the universe, it was not a fun conference. Right? But is Google in the same business? Would Google argue that they are in the knowledge business? I would say probably not. They might use the word knowledge, but Google really is in the dissemination business. Right? Google doesn't pretend to truly understand the information it is providing you. It simply argues that it can provide you information very efficiently. That's very different, right? Google can search a lot of information. It's relatively, we think in computationally terms it's elegant and smart, but it has very little to do with the actual knowledge that it's finding. And Google really, really doesn't worry about whether you care after it gives you that information. All it cares is that you saw an ad in the process, right? I mean, Google is the world's largest ad agency. We have to realize that is its business model. And so, are they in the knowledge business? Are they in the same business as libraries? I would say no. Are they closely aligned? Are they things we can learn from? Are they things we should be aware of? Sure. But if what we do is we face a situation, and we have faced a situation where people go, I don't need a library because I have Google. If we don't know that they are in a different business, we will get into a really bad argument. The really bad argument is, well, yeah, but libraries are better at this stuff. It's a very defensive argument. If you say, well, we don't need it because we have Google, what you end up trying to do is say why you are a better Google than Google. You will not win. If what you say is, you know what, Google's great for searching. It's crappy at knowledge. You know, if what you really want is a bunch of crap, that's fine. We can do that, right? That's why I always had a problem with the librarian, the best search engine. No, you're not. Librarians are crappy search engines. Because search engines give you like thousands and thousands of results in nanoseconds. And I don't really think that's what you want to brag about, right? What librarians are really good at is understanding your need and getting you the right information for the need. What they're doing is they're good at building your knowledge, right? It's not enough to say, oh, you have a question, the old joke, ask a librarian the time and they give you a book on clocks, right? It's not enough to say, I gave them a book anymore. It's not enough to say that you gave them the stuff and you walked away. Now, if you look at in academic libraries, a huge stress is on outcomes. All right, you're an academic library. Why are the students of Catholic better that you are here? Right? I want to know what's the scholastic output. I want to know what the impact is on curriculum. I want to know, in school libraries, how are my students going to do better on test scores and how are they going to perform better? You can't answer that from a Google perspective. Google will say, I gave them a lot of stuff. I hope it was helpful. Librarians are learning that that's not good enough. What they have to say is, I had this direct impact. This impact led to better grade, better situation, led to a better whatever it is. In the public libraries, you see this in economic development. Look at the Urban Libraries Council and look at what they're saying about libraries and public libraries. They don't just say public good. They say it spurs economic development, it improves workforce, it brings more people into the population, it helps the population there start small businesses. They're talking impacts. And to talk impacts and to talk about directed consequences, you're talking knowledge, you're talking learning. To say we were there and it was helpful, that's not enough. Amazon. Is Amazon in the same business that we are? And this is not as easy an answer as one might think. Well, they're in the sales business and they're selling stuff. It just so happens that the stuff they're selling happens to be the same thing that libraries lend. Does that mean we're in the same business? Well, let me see if I can think of an analogy. I'm drinking bottled water, and the Potomac is a river made of water. Therefore, a bottle of water and the Potomac are the same thing. This is a logical fallacy, right? The notion that just because they're working with the same... Is Sears in the same business as libraries? Believe it or not, I've had this discussion in reference. In reference, is Sears the same thing? Well, why would you even ask that question? Well, when my washing machine breaks, I call someone with a question, and they provide me an answer. When I have an information question, I call a reference librarian and they provide me with it. Sears and reference librarians are in the same business, right? No, I don't think anyone would buy that argument. Well, Sears will only answer questions on the specific item. They only take you this so far. They're not in an open construct. They deal with limited domain knowledge. They deal with all this other stuff. They don't have We can make that argument. And yet when we look at Amazon, we somehow lose our voice to say, well, sure, if you want to buy a book, go to Amazon. Right? I mean, that's the trick. If you want to buy a book, go to Amazon or go to Barnes & Noble. Because libraries, if you want to buy a book, you're going to get the crappy ones that we don't need anymore that we put in the bookstore to hope to raise some funds for the real books we really want. Right? If we are in the same business of Amazon, we do a piss poor job at it. Are we in the same as call centers? No. This one's fun. Are we in the same business as schools? And I would argue, yeah. What's really interesting, if you want to see the most closely aligned industry with libraries, and I don't care if you're talking academic, I don't care if you're talking special, I don't care if you're talking about public. Schools are very much in aligned business structures. They do continuing education. One could argue that reference and service outreach is in fact continuing education on a regular basis based on need as opposed to a regular schedule. In K-12, school library media specialists are teachers. I mean, it's a field that's given up any distinction. They have a curriculum. It happens to be an information curriculum versus science curriculum. But do our integrated library services systems vendors realize that we're not in the same business? Well, let's take a look. Okay. If you have not, you will at some point, if you work into a library, have the following conversation. Our catalog sucks. Maybe you're in a nice place and they'll say our catalog is not optimal. Maybe you'll be in a really quaint setting where they'll go, if only it could be a little better. But often the word sucks will come up. All right, how could we make it better? How could we make it better? Let's see. Well, it really needs to be more like Google. You know, all this fielded garbage crap, it just needs to be one line. We just want one search line. Yeah, but that Google's fine for the search. All right, so the search should look like Google, but the results should look like Amazon. How many people, and I'll be the first to admit it, when they are looking for a book in their library, start at Amazon? Yes? No? Yeah. Why? Let's think about it. Why do you go to Amazon to find the book, get the ISBN number or title, and then go into your catalog? I'll tell you why. I'm going to do a search for a book. Now, the great thing with having the last name of Lankus is that no one else has the last name of Lankus, though it turns out it's German. I didn't know. Like half my heritage I can trace back to like the Middle Ages, and half my heritage is like, I have no idea. I'm going to search for Lankus, and the first result you'll find in most catalogs will not be anything by me. It'll be by a fellow by the name of J.J. Lankus, who during the turn of the century was doing woodcut art, which is really cool woodcut art. This is one of his books. So if we took a J.J. Lankus book, which is the woodcuttings of J.J. Lankus, and we put that into WorldCat, and we take a screen dump of all the information that WorldCat has, all right? So what that little square up there represents is every piece of data. If you were to scroll down, whatever, that's what WorldCat has about that book. Right? With me so far? This is what the Library of Congress has about that book with me so far. This is the entire bibliographic information that Syracuse University holds about that book. Now, these, oh, it's horrible, it's bad, it's terrible, we want it better, we want it more Amazon-like, that almost always turns into simpler. We need to make it simpler, easier to understand. Ready for Amazon? Same book. That's what Amazon has. Simpler, easier, less stuff, less confusing stuff. What's going on here? Well, it's all ads. Well, no. That first little itty-bitty block at the top is the branding and navigation. Not just branding of Amazon.com, it's their search engine, it's a drop-down to find their other scores and sections. This next big block is the sales information. Think of it as, it's really bibliographic data, but it includes the price, the date, the author, that kind of thing. Underneath that, you're going to find quality reviews. So underneath that, what you have are the New York Times book review, what this trusted source tells you about the book. Underneath that, you've got bibliographic data. Now what's interesting, if you add that block to the sales information block, it's almost equivalent to these. Because really that's metadata. That's ISBN number and all this other stuff. So what else is on this page? What do they have that we don't? Well, let's take a look. First, you could search inside the book. Okay, will we ever get publishers to do it? That's fine, but I can search the actual text of the book. The next one, citations. What is citations? Means anything that this book referred to or any book that referred to this. Now, if you're in an academic library, you're familiar with something called Web of Science, which costs about $250,000 to $300,000 for a university of this size to purchase. Why do they purchase it? Because academics like us cannot live and get tenure without it. What it does is it's a citation index. It says what you cited, who cited you, by whom, all that kind of stuff. Why in the world does Amazon want citations? Well, it's a conversation. Why do academics care about citations? We care about citations because it's our very formal, structured conversation that we're having. When I put a cite to Dave's work, it's not because I like you, right? It's not because, oh, and by the way, shout out to my man, right? What it is, it's saying the work I have follows on his work, refutes your work. Right? Chuck McClure, mentor of mine, once said the 3 best ways to get cited: say it first, because you're the seminal article and everyone's got to point to it. Say it last, because you're the summary article and everyone can point to that. Or say it stupid, because if they want to disagree, they got to cite you, right? So it's like, I had this one person come up at a conference and go, well, I'm presenting based on your work. I said, well, that's great. She goes, well, but you should know, I'm doing it because I disagree with you, and I really think that you made a mistake in this. I said, did you cite me? She goes, yeah. I said, I'm fine. Right? Because come tenure time, there's a citation. It's there. Right? What this is showing you is that there's a conversation going on about this book. It's a slow, scholarly, academic, publishing-oriented one, usually with peer review, but it's a conversation. And what that means is that if you find this book and you want to see, follow up that conversation with citations, you can do it. No. All right, let's keep going. Sponsorship. All right, ad stuff. Tagging and social bookmarking, social tools. Okay, it's trendy, it's cool, it's there. What else is here? Customer reviews. Customer reviews. Why customer reviews? Well, because they're going to talk about a book in a radically different way than other customers are. And what's interesting is you can find customer reviews. Some are going to say it's great, some are going to say it's horrible. They even have reviews of the reviews to say how many people found what useful. And so then what else? Discussion lists and bulletin boards. We have pathfinders. Remember when we did pathfinders? We have then some more marketing information and your previous search history. But if you look at what's the difference between that and that, it's conversations. What you're doing is you're not simply describing the artifact, you're describing how people are talking about and using the artifact. So why is it easier to find something in this world than that? It's not the keyword count. It's not the fact that there's just more text to process. What's happening is this is a discovery tool, because they want you to find something. This is an inventory system. What Dewey built and what we have replicated is an inventory system. It's a shelf list. If you look at what's here that's not here, which is actually the bulk of the page, it tells you what floor it's on and what call number it's there. And if it's a multiple library situation, which branch it's in. The majority of screen real estate in here is telling you the location of an item has nothing to do with what the item is about or how the item is used. It is telling you about a physical address. There is no physical address here. Clearly, their business model, they don't care about the physical address. But that's not completely true. Because if you order this book, they gotta find a copy, right? So that data is here. They're just not showing it to you. An inventory system is when you go shopping and you find the perfect rubber duck. And you say, this is the perfect rubber duck, but I wish it were in yellow. And you go to the sales agent and go, do you have this in yellow? And the sales agent will take this, walk behind a very large counter, hide, and type obscure things on usually a text-based screen that they don't let you see, and come back and say, yes, we have it at our Alexandria store, we have it at whatever. What they're doing is they're searching the inventory system, and the last thing they want to do is turn that interface around to you, because it's obscure, and it doesn't matter. But what do we do as libraries? Good luck. We turn our inventory systems, useful internal mechanisms that we use to locate things and find out they're disappearing, and we take them our primary interface to the public. And so what you're able to do much more efficiently here, and you can't do it all here, is to find the physical location of something. But is that what our patrons really care about? God, I was hoping that was on the 3rd floor. Pfft, that's my favorite floor, right? That doesn't have anything to do with what people really need this information for. By the way, you want to make this from ridiculous to absurd. This book was written in 1990, and it was written in, didn't have a digital copy. This is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, right? A little bit more looked at. But even the obscure book had plenty of this stuff. This is all conversation. What we're seeing here is that by organizing information around conversation, we can find them better. Now, does that mean they're in the same business as us? No, because they're about buying something. We are about finding it, right? But we've forgotten that we're about finding the item, not finding its location, right? This is all inventory systems. Card catalogs weren't to find the book. They were to find where the book was located. It's known item searching. This is not known item searching. This is browsing and finding and discovering. So are Amazon and libraries in the same business? I would say no. Are there things we can learn from them? Yes. Are there things that the ILS vendor should desperately learn from them very quickly? Yes. Right? But we, back to that repetition thing, have to stop and realize what we've been asking them to do for decades upon decades, which is to build us better inventory systems. And so what drives me nuts is when ILSs, and they are coming out left and right, put their big Library 2.0 enabled sticker on it, and what they've done is add tagging. It's like, look, it's a big ugly gorilla, but if we put this tag on it, it's now a handsome knight. No, it's still a big ugly gorilla with a crappy paint job, right? What we're dealing with, that was not even a continuous metaphor throughout that discussion. But the problem is, I don't even think ILS vendors believe what they're producing is what people need anymore. But they have contracts, and the last contract that said it, and the last contract, and there's this inertia that keeps these systems going. Now, as an aside, what scares me greatly is when you get some people who get a glimmer of this and they try and break out of it. So one of my, a good, impressive, really cool librarian you should get to know in your life is Eli Nyberger, who's the head of technology for the Ann Arbor District Library. The Ann Arbor District Library built a new library system, but they didn't buy a new library system. What they did was they took their existing ILS and they took an open source package called Drupal, which is written in PHP, and that's the interface people come in. So they come into Drupal, which is this web-based content management system, and every time they search for a book, Drupal takes it, passes it off as an XML query, sorry to tech out on you for a moment, finds the item, sends it back as this XML query, where Drupal then formats it to look pretty, and at the same time combines it with tagging data, social data, recommender system, your system. So it integrates all these systems. And now what you're seeing is a spate of new products, from innovative interfaces to Aqua Browser to whatever, where they're selling to libraries, say, this is your new front end, and what it does is it searches your catalog and your website and your searching systems. What scares me about this is, if you want to add any new resource, you got to come to us for a plugin. and the same library vendor that underlies Ann Arbor's Drupal library, they've now rewritten their user agreement so you're not allowed to do it. They've disabled their XML queries. So they're all for making really cool integrated interfaces that hide the catalog as long as the catalog vendors can write it and charge for it. That scares me. All right. So, all right, where are we going from here? I have no idea. Let's find out. So, what does all this have to do with where we're going? I forget how long I'm supposed to go, but when would you like me to end? Just keep going, and when you fall asleep, you're done? All right. I'll try to speed it along here. All right. So, I mentioned two factors. One was the idea that we're in the knowledge business, therefore we're in the conversation business, right? And I just showed you an example of how Amazon facilitates conversations and how library systems do not. But I've also talked about there's an efficiency to here that we do this. And there's a whole sort of raft. But here's the other aspect I mentioned, which is dissemination is not learning. There's an interesting pressure to participate that comes from this philosophy. And the philosophy says, if I am learning, I want to be an active participant in that learning process. I can't just sit in a chair and have you talk at me and learn. I must actively engage this content, right? Constructivism, lots of different ways to put it, but it comes down to, if you want me to learn, I have to be invested in this process. I mean, you're Catholic, right? So, you got tuition invested in this process, but, you have to write the paper, you have to do all this stuff. You can't just come into a room, sit here for 3 hours and knit, and then walk away and pretend that you learned. You got to attend, you got to pay attention, you got to ask questions, right? So there's a pressure in learning situations to be active constructors of knowledge. And then when they go online, they want tools that allow and facilitate conversation and participation. If I'm going to be on your system, and the reason I'm on your system is because I want to learn, I also want to be invested and able to construct and engage in that system, right? So how does this play out? Well, let's look at a couple of things. Let's look at the internet as an example of how this plays out. And I want you to just, for a moment, think of the internet as 4 distinct parts. There is the infrastructure, the wires that connect us, and the protocols that allow that to happen. There are the application builders. These are people that allow information to be transmitted over the infrastructure to another point. And there are the information services. These are the people who add their information, use the applications to send their information over the infrastructure to other applications, where they are finally used. People who take the information from the internet and apply it to their given context or situation. All right? So the wires, the software, the stuff, and how it's going to be used. If we look at each level, we can see a wave of participation moving up that level. So at the very least, we look at things like, at the infrastructure, TCP/IP. Sort of Washington's famous for having declared the internet as the interwebs and their tubes. The idea that how the internet works is it's a series of cooperations. There is no internet. It's our network agrees to talk to your network. And the only thing we agree on is when we send data back and forth, we're going to format it via this thing called TCP/IP. We don't even agree we're going to take it all. We can filter it, we can diminish it. We don't agree on the bandwidth. All we agree on is if I send information to you, it's going to be in this format. If you send it to me, it's got to be in this format. Right? That's it. It's an agreement. It's a participation. The two networks, the multiple networks, have to agree to participate on a very loose system. This is not how infrastructure always was. This is not, once again, natural. If you go back far enough, you'll remember things like Prodigy and CompuServe and AOL when they sent out all those damn disks, right? These were wide area networks that weren't based on cooperation or participation. It was, we build infrastructure, you use infrastructure. Don't like ours? Too bad. Want more bandwidth? Too bad. You want to talk to multiple people? Too bad. You want to build your own email application? Too bad. It was not a participatory infrastructure. And what's interesting is if you look at all of those, they're gone, or in the case of AOL, they've become a service provider and they've adopted this infrastructure model. This pressure to say, if you want me to be part of your network, you've got to let me shape that network, has played out at that level. At the application level, this clearly is the open source philosophy and movement that says, if you want me to use your software, write software, I have to be able to see it, test it, be part of it, trust the situation. So in electronic voting, which is sort of apt for these days, there are two camps. There's the camp that says, hide the code, secure the code, by reputable people, lock it away, that will keep it secure. And this other camp that goes, that's garbage. Put the code out there, make it transparent, let everyone try and beat up on it to find the flaws and fix it, then I'll trust it. Two different philosophies. Open source is, if it's out there and the community can see it and vet it, and I can participate in it, it's good. Also back to the AOL example. It used to be, you're AOL, you got to use our browser, you got to use our email package. Now it's like, I don't like yours, I'm going to find another one. I want a marketplace. If I can't find one there, I'll write my own. Right? Very different. And now we see it very much at the information services level. Information services level, call it Web 2.0, what have you, when I come and get your information, I want the same ability to manipulate and create your information. This shows up in all different things. Amazon, it's, don't just give me the book, I want to comment on the book. But we also see it in things like walmartsucks.com. When I go to Walmart and I have a problem with Walmart, you ever go to Walmart site and try and complain about it, you're not going to find a big form that says, let's publicly discuss how we are deficient. But what people quickly realized is, if Walmart won't let me do it, for 15 bucks in GoDaddy.com, I can make my own domain with my own website with 3 clicks that I can put up all my dissension. And suddenly companies had to realize that, wait a minute, if I don't let them do it in my own forum and shape my own forum where at least I can have an ability to respond, they have this wide open infrastructure where they can create their own alternative mechanisms and methods. You also see this in really practical ways, things like mashups in Google Maps, where I can take the information, your crime statistics, your map from Google Maps, and I can make a GIS interface that I couldn't have done before, in new and novel ways. I want to be able to shape it and craft it. So when you go to a library and you say, you know what, I think you miscategorized this book. I want to tell you what I think about this book. Sorry. Right, good luck, right? Libraries have 2 types of people, librarians and non-librarians. And it doesn't matter whether you're the janitor or the president of the university, you're not touching our catalog records unless you have that MLS, right? So participation is, but what happens is people come in and they say, oh, the library won't let me do this. I can go to GoDaddy or I can go to Amazon, or I can go, and they're recreating us. Now, by the way, slightly little internal issue. Libraries themselves are finding a problem because they used to be able to control what services got implemented by the library. Now librarians come in and say, I want a blog. And the IT staff goes, oh, we can't blog, whatever. They go, fine. I go to blogger.com and in 3 clicks, I have my official library blog, but it's not controlled by the library anymore. So information services are having to accommodate participation. If they can't participate, the vehicles by which they can participate are so wide open, it's forcing a change in culture. So this whole Department of Justice discussion was interesting. And it became, at some point, what happens when Department of Justice officials become so frustrated with the IT staff, they go and recreate the Department of Justice outside in a less secure environment, all these other things. And at the use level, we talk about things like credibility. The idea that don't tell me what's official, I want to determine what's official. So the idea that it came from an authority source now becomes an issue of testing the information, which is interesting because for librarians, we are in an excellent spot to accommodate that because we're used to providing multiple sources of information to support a conclusion. And yet when you look at how we act and talk, we talk very much as we are the authority giving you only good information. This is not something that's going to last long. Right? It's also interesting that people trust librarians without any sort of information or identification about them and their credentials. I think that's also going to be challenged. So, what does participatory tell us about libraries and systems? First of all, the user is in control. It is, and it's not user-based systems. User-based systems are we went and talked to the users and we did some focus groups. We built our best system that we think would meet them. It is literally we build an infrastructure, get the hell out of the way, and let the users build their own systems around themselves. It is all about learning. I don't care if you're in a special library, school library, public library, whatever kind of library you're in, you are in a learning system. And you are, to a degree, a teacher. Learning is a collaborative conversation. It is not simply directed information. Library serves as a facilitator of that conversation. Your job as a librarian is to go into communities and say, how can we make this community better? Now, I want to be really clear. There's a twist on facilitation. That does not mean transparent agent. That does not mean invisible component. That means someone who walks in and says, I'm here to help and I have a point of view. One of the things that I have a real problem with is the notion that somehow we teach librarians the ethics of being non-biased. It is garbage. There is no such thing as unbiased. The minute someone asks you a question, and whether you turn to a keyboard or turn to a book, you have a bias. The minute that you decide when to stop a query, you have a bias. The minute when you pick your keywords or expanding keywords, you have a bias. The point is not that you don't have biases. The point is that you are aware and able to see them, and you are able to relate them to a user need. Right? Very important, very different. That facilitation with the community means shared ownership. That instead of the library being somehow a service to the community, it is of the community. And if you are of the community, that means you must be willing to cede control to the community. The community can cede it right back to you, or they can use you as a proxy. But it's very different than we are up here and the users will come to us when they need it because we're a public good. Right? Invest in tools for creation over the collection of artifacts. One of the things we're working with at the Philadelphia Public Library are a series of centers where we want specific communities that we can support. And the way we did this is we went out to community members and said, what do you need? And we talked to musicians. And the number one things that musicians said they wanted out of their public library, 2 grand pianos on a stage, where they had a big enough area where they could do performances. They wanted a space to perform. And by the way, they really don't care if you record it and create that as part of the collection because the publishing model in classical music is obliterated. It doesn't exist anymore. So what musicians look at a library and say, yeah, we need the scores and we need the material, but we really need a place to do this. And so what's the library's role there? We talked to businesses and we said, all right, how can the business section of the library be better? And they said, first of all, you should gear it towards entrepreneurs. Big businesses have their own libraries. We don't need a public library doing that. What we need is the person who wants to start a small business. And that person needs books and resources? Yeah, maybe, but what that person really needs is a FedEx Kinko's quickly available, a workspace so that they can get out of their home when they actually need to work on the idea, a boardroom where they can pitch the idea, mentors and investor networks that they can get access to, and computing skills so they can write make a decent PowerPoint presentation for the pitch. That's what a library should look like to an entrepreneur. Not give me a book on how to start a day spa. That's fine, but that's not going to help them become an entrepreneur. And by the way, when you have a question, we're going to set up a board of entrepreneurs to help you guide that. I thought that was really interesting. All right, I'm getting there, I promise. So what's the mission of a library in this set? To facilitate knowledge creation of its community through conversation. Not to provide lots of books, not to provide lots of resources. That may be how we do the facilitation. Once again, I don't want to say burn all the books. But realize that those books, those mechanisms are a means to an end. The end is knowledge creation. It's better decisions. It's better conversations that we're having in the community. Right? And this is people look at me and go, oh God, this means that I have to do a public access catalog where anyone in the universe can come and add comments and metadata. Trust me when I tell you, talking to the Department of Justice, this is not what they have in mind. Right? The community they're dealing with is very hierarchical. You're a lawyer or you're not a lawyer. It is very secretive. I don't want to tell you what I'm working on because frankly, it could well throw us into war. You know, little things like that. Right? And so how do you facilitate a conversation there? You probably don't do it through open forums. You probably do it in very discreet one-to-one conversations. You ensure privacy of the information. You can do it in a buttoned-down environment. Because the idea is to know that community. Not create a community, not force a community, but know it and meet its norms. Influence it. As a facilitator, you have a point of view, and you should express it. But we also need to think bigger and not hype. I don't like 2.0. It's not a product or a feature set. It's a recognition of new societal needs and capabilities. I was having a very heated debate out with someone, Jennifer, that, oh, we can do it because the technology lets us. And I don't think that's true. I think technology is finally catching up to what we want to do. You know, it's very much that Boolean is not a natural language. The fact that we built catalogs and the systems, we built those systems not because they were natural. We built those systems because we were technologically limited. I remember the days of talking about the first OPACs where they said, how many characters is a title? In your MARC record, how many characters do you need for a title? 32 okay? Right? 32 characters for a title. This was not because all titles, right? All titles, well, no, in the early days, 32. Yeah. Right, no.
I remember 250.
Right, but did we come up with 250 because that's what titles are like? No, it's because that's how much memory we could slot you in the VAX, yeah. Right? And so what we're getting to the point of not, well, technology allows us to do all, or technology, we can do it because technology tells us. It's like, this is how we should have always been doing it. And finally, technology is able that we can have conversations and participation. And you don't have to have a PhD or a Mensa diploma to go in and create blogs and to create content online. Right? that we need to prepare for a Dewey level shift in the field. That we need to think that at that level, that as Dewey came in and came up with standardization and classification, and not that he invented it all, but he certainly brought it together. He created the American Library Association. He did an amazing amount of things that really structured the field to this day. We need to prepare for that level of change again. That I was talking today with some people on the Future of Reference Committee. I said, well, here's partly my problem is that I think in 10 years we won't have reference librarians. Dave Lankus said that, the reference guy? I said, yeah, but I don't think we're going to have tech services librarians and cataloging librarians and these kind of, I think we're going to have librarians. And they're going to be a mix of tool builders, and some might specialize in technology and some might not. But actually, I don't even know what titles we're going to have because I think we're at that level of shift. That we need to facilitate access knowledge environments, so we need to digitally enable conversations. And what is the implication of this for library science education? For you guys? Well, what's our mission? If that's the mission of libraries, what should we be teaching? I think we need to teach change management, not leadership. And what do I mean by that? We need to face the dysfunctional innovation by new hire situation. All right, so here's the deal. I don't know if you face this, but you will soon. You're going to graduate one day, and a library is going to hire you. And here's the deal. I don't care your age, you will be considered the kid, the young one. And you will be brought in because you're young, because you're new, because you're fresh, because you have the new fancy ideas and technical skills. And here's the problem. If you are hired because of that, they may be hiring you as an excuse not to learn it themselves. So I can't tell you the number of libraries where I walk in and they all tell me about the new kid. And it's always like, oh, she's great, she has these great ideas, he's wonderful, he can do all this stuff. He also has the lowest status position in the organization, the least cultural knowledge within the organization, the least power within the organization, and probably the least amount of change in how to manipulate the organization. This is your innovation cycle? Bring the new person without any power and say, go make us great. And by the way, I'll be over here doing what we really do. Right? That's bad. And if you're in that situation as a fresh new face, you're going to go, I hate this job, I hate this job. You're going to be frustrated. Because what library schools are really good at, and I'm sure Catholic is an exception, is we believe that we train leaders. You're trained leaders. We're not training you for your first job, we're training you for leaders. And what that often means is we give the vision, and we give you these wonderful, inspirational, high-level talks by Dave Lankus, and we give you some technology skills, and then we throw you into the wilds of libraries and say, good luck. What we need to do is teach these students, teach you folks, how to be radical change agents, how to walk into an organization and disrupt it, how to actually know the cultural techniques to learn the culture, understand the culture, and I hate to break it, undermine the culture, to really break it and change it into what you need. And that's very different than teaching you leadership. Because leadership is what you do when someone invests you with power. You got to steal the power first. That's what we need to teach. So how do we do that? First we have to drink, as LIS educators, we need to drink our own Kool-Aid and eat our own dog food. We need to recognize that the shift in innovation has been concentrated in academia for so long is not. That it used to be you went to library school to learn the best library practice, but now the best library practice may well come from libraries, may well come from other industries completely. And we are increasingly ones that are pointing you to innovation and not necessarily the one generating ourselves. We need to model co-learning. You should be perfectly happy when you walk into a classroom and have a professor tell you, I know half of what we're going to learn this year, and the other half we're going to learn together. Right? Because one of the problems is that you teach technology and you have a technology class. When do you learn that? Your off hours? When you're not doing service? You go on sabbatical, right? So good news, I'm on sabbatical this year. I'm going to learn about a decade's worth of new technology that hasn't been invented yet so I can carry it through. Right? It's crap. We can't do it. So we need to recognize and enhance our own participatory network, and we need to transform ourselves from a school to a school of thought. Now this is really interesting. How much time does Catholic, I'll tell you how much time Syracuse spends on this. How much time does Catholic as a school sit down and say, what is librarianship today? Are we in radical? Do we buy that crap that Lankus was talking about or not? What is the mission of a library? How do we prepare them? Can we truly say that academic libraries and public libraries are being equally well supported by what we teach? What is that commonality? Because right now, we are at a point where things change radically and we have to be ready. And that doesn't mean teaching more cataloging classes. And frankly, it means that we have to survive in an environment where ALA accreditation forces us into a 3-credit core curriculum that we have to express for 7 years before we deliver it. That's nuts. And so what we really need to be doing is saying, you know what? I don't know, but I do know core principles. I do know theories that are going to guide us through it, and I'm willing to come invent with you. What we need is a place within, and I don't even have to say every school needs it, but within the library science community, we need a place of LIS education that people can go and say, we're going to invent the future. Right? Alan Kay, my favorite quote ever. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Right? I don't know. Change will happen. Do you want change to happen to you, or do you want to make change? If you want the job you really want, don't go get a degree, have someone else tell you what that is, and wait to get it. You need to go out and make it. Because if we simply adopt features and technologies from other disciplines and say that's cool and neat, we will at best be second best. If we try and be the best Google there is, Google will beat us at that. If we try to be the best Amazon, Amazon will beat us at that. And why? Because that's not our business. And if we don't know what our business is, how could we ever accelerate past them or better serve our users? It's the obligation of LIS education to facilitate this discussion, and we must accept this obligation of leadership, of change. That it is our role as LIS educators, your role as LIS students, to change it. So I'm going to go back to that Florentine dilemma. If what we are doing in LIS education is at best teaching you to be like us and send you out, we have failed. What we must do as LIS educators, what our responsibilities as LIS educators to our field is to produce students that scare the hell out of us. What we need to do on a regular basis is prepare people simply to go and think about the core principles and innovate and do things we never thought we could. That at some point, and it's ego problem centric, that we need students that come back in a year and say, this is what you need to teach in your classes now. Not give us advice and be on an advisory panel, but I just changed the world. You need to catch up in your classes. We also need the mechanisms to allow us to do that. But that's the kind of work we need to be in. I don't want to produce spare parts. Sally the reference librarian died. Wheel in a new Sally. Right? That's not the business we're in. Right? I need to put you in the business that when you're done and you get your first library job, you walk into the library and say, pretty good library you got here. Just wait till 2 years what it's going to look like. Right? And then walk back and say, that was really great what you taught us. It really was. Completely irrelevant now, so here's the new curriculum, right? And we need to teach it in real settings and real environments, more than just a practicum, once somewhere in there. Because here's the problem. We produce frictionless environments. You come in with a brilliant idea, we have you write a paper, we give you an A, you hand it in, you're done. In a real world setting, you have to fight for the budget, you have to fight the idiot who won't let you do it, you won't get the IT people. We need to put you in situations where you have to do it. I mean, ironically, we have to partner with idiots just to give you something to work against, right? A grinding stone. Amen. So, yeah, in summary, partner with idiots, produce students who scare you and don't know half the curriculum you teach, right? But that's what we're talking about. That's what I mean by eating your own Kool-Aid. If we believe in participation and we teach that this is participation, we teach conversation, do it! That's what we can do. Imagine if we had an LIS program, and LIS programs around the country, and a band of sort of renegade change agents that come out of this as a cohort and say, you know what exists? I appreciate it, and I love it, and I'm inspired by my past, but I will not be limited by it. I will not repeat your mistakes. I will acknowledge that what you did in the past was great and brilliant, and you will acknowledge that as we move forward, we're going to do great and brilliant things. Because if we live constantly in the past of the greats behind us, we have trouble. And that's an inspiring goal, and it's not an anger and a venom and we're doing it all wrong. It's we can do better. And we can do better. Every day of our lives, we can do better. And that's our job, is to do better as libraries, as library students, and as library science educators. Thank you very much. All right, so where'd I get that all wrong?
That kind of fit my day. Yeah, that's the best thing I've heard since I started. No, honestly, I just, that's what I've been looking for this whole time. Not that I've been doing this, it's my second semester.
So everyone who taught her in the first semester, don't be offended, but yeah. Yeah, right.
This is the whole reason why I wanted to pursue library school. Their whole radical change agent thing, that totally speaks to me. That's exactly where I want to go. And I'm coming from working within, an institution where I'm surrounded by, great people, but also lots of idiots. And it's, the catalog sucks, and there is no catalog, there's no communication. So thanks. This is great.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of things. One, just a small example of the kind of conversation starting that actually doesn't depend on technology.
Absolutely.
I was participating in one of the librarian blogs started a conversation about Web 2.0, Library 2.0. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was right now.
There are only 300 or 400 of those to choose from, right?
And somebody in response to the original blog posting talked about working in a library, 20 years ago, where they just glued in paper in the back of the book so that people who had read the book had their comments.
Yes!
Used to the book, so the next person to pull that book off the shelf could have the benefit of that.
Isn't it amazing in the library environment we're so paranoid about privacy that we have a tradition of the book checkout cards in the back that told you who took out the book last? I mean, I have many students who tell me they used to go to the academic library and look at the circ slip, say, oh, Fred read this one. This one's a good one. And the number one way that people find one of the number one ways people find new books of reading in public libraries is to look at the return cart. What's sitting there waiting to get reshelved. I mean, and that's what I also want to. I have a doctoral student who I had to spend a lot of time with because he was convinced that we had invented participatory networks. And we've done it. This is new. This is radical. And I wanted to say, this is Socrates. This is Aristotle. I mean, the academy, where the word comes from, it was a gymnasium outside of Athens, where Plato would go and sort of work out and then hang around and talk about, what's the meaning of life, right? Modern Western thought was born in a YMCA. I love that, right? That the academy is a place for intellectual play as much as it is a place for deep thoughts to be transmitted. So, I always thought that the best motto of our schools should be, we're busy inventing the future, come join us. It's a great example. And I think that, if you read the initial tech brief, a lot of it is what we are now doing in our physical settings, we need to do online. In our physical settings, I remember I talked with your new dean about this space. And the idea was a place to collaborate and such and build, sort of hangout joint. And you see libraries doing this all the time, taking down shelves and putting in places. And yet online, where do you go hang out? Where do you go chat? Where do you go to discuss? Where do you go have a chance to collaborate and have conversations? On our library sites are choose a Barbara Quinn analogy, are coral reefs without the fish, right? We build these gorgeous structures and we forget that people built them, and there's life there, and there's interesting things going on there. So, anyway, go to
the other thing that I would just contribute to the discussion is I've had occasion recently to spend a lot of time reading John Cotton Dana and Ranganathan.
Oh yeah.
And we always trot out, books are for use, and we quote it, and then we put it aside. But you read what Ranganathan had to say about books are for use, and he was an advocate of having food facilities in the library.
Yeah. And
in my career, I had to fight somebody who absolutely was dead set against allowing people to bring food into the library. Right. So, not that those folks aren't dated in some respect, but I like to believe that they were the kinds of radical change agents who would very much applaud,
I do too.
Continuing change.
Yeah. I mean, I pick on Dewey, as a fiery speaker from upstate New York. We all sort of have to, do our genuflecting, but here was a man who was in radical change. I mean, if you've ever read a history of Dewey, it's really interesting because not only did he buy the fact that we needed to standardize our cataloging, the reason it's called the Dewey Decimal System is he was a huge advocate of the metric system. And he wanted, besides founding the American Library Association, he helped found the American Metrics Association. And spelling reform. I mean, he was a guy who wanted to change a lot of things. Some caught on, some didn't. But, right, and I think that now is a time for big ideas, too. That we should think changing the industry and the field. And not incrementally. And will we succeed in every aspect? No. But, God, why wouldn't you try? So. And by the way, I'd love to say if you come to Syracuse, everything will be like this. But we have our challenges too. Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, and you have to be because that's one of those leadership things. I can give you the vision, I can get you all pumped up, but the truth is you're the one who's about to walk into the fire. So it's easy for me. Yes, ma'am.
I'm already a librarian coming back, starting school, and I have a million questions all the time that I want answers to.
Mm-hmm.
Not from 10 different people with 10 different answers. I need, because I'm a solo librarian also, I need more authoritative answers to things from the school that I go to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I tend to get more from, listservs and probably because I spend 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day at work, and those listservs come into me, fed to me, rather than going out and getting them.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave has seen me in rooms ask, can somebody, tell me about metadata and give me answers about, where we're going with these things. And it's a frustration for me because things come up so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have to partner with idiots
Mm-hmm.
who know so little and block every change that you're trying to affect in your organization, and it's constantly frustrating. So I appreciated the things that you said. I didn't agree with everything.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely not. One of the things we're finding in authority is that people in Wikipedia days talked about the death of authority. I think and pronouncements of its death is a little premature in the sense that I think what we have now is a sort of abundance of authority, that you can pick the authority that you want to listen to. And that's important, though, that how you determine what it is, who you're going to listen to, and why, you now have much more control of determining their authority than I think you had in the past. And but you're right, there's an equal obligation. That's a lot of work compared to,
Look at all the authorities that
Yeah.
he refers to and
Absolutely.
Jason Baker refers to.
Well,
And the and this is my dilemma, these are the things that are, this is true and this will never steer you wrong, and then 20 years down the road, it's not working.
Yeah. And these things happen. I mean, one of the things is that things don't always work for 100 years, and it's not because they were wrong, it's because things changed in 100 years. And it's why I get so frustrated with millennial discussions. Oh, the millennial. It's like this sainted class of people who somehow can walk up to a computer and magically make it operate with their brain. And Socrates, Socrates probably at some point talked about the millennials, or maybe he talked about the 400 BCEs or whatever they are. But, they have time, for example. They have more exposure. But that doesn't mean they're fundamentally different. And I mean, I know 13-year-olds that I can beat at Guitar Hero 3. I just want to point that out. Right? Yeah. And so, though I did get my butt kicked by a second grader the other day, and that was very discouraging. But it's what we attend to, what's important, and what we prioritize that is what we spend time on and learn. And am I arguing that in all cases that should be technology? No, but I think we should probably spend more time on it than we do. Am I arguing it should be organizational culture? Yes. I mean, a lot more time figuring out how to work within an organization. Technology is a tool. And what's interesting is that it's a tool that's often used against us. And that's a big us versus them dichotomy that doesn't truly exist. But I can't tell you the number of times librarians tell me, oh, the IT staff won't let me do anything cool. I say, well, you know how to beat that. What's that? Learn how to talk to them. And to do that, you need a lot more three-letter acronyms, and you probably need to spend some time with PHP, and I'm sorry. But if they have the power, part of radical change is figuring out how they got it, and a lot of it's language exclusion. Not even skills, language exclusion. And I will also argue that librarianship is as much, if not more, of a technical skill than computer science. Tell me that looking at a MARC record and application of AAC-R2 is not an obscure, arcane application of technology in a rigorous rule set. All right, so theirs is in code and ours is in MARC. They're transferable skills there too. But point well taken, very well taken.
Dave, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you again.